The protagonist of this story has two names. The first was Denise Pladl. She was the biological daughter of Stephen and Alyssa Pladl. Denise's parents were perhaps a bit too young as a couple, especially Alyssa. They had met online in 1995. At that time, Stephen was 20 years old and Alyssa was only 15. But that didn't seem to matter to them. The real problem for them was that Stephen lived in New York while Alyssa lived in Texas, so there was a significant distance between them. Despite that, they managed to have a long-distance relationship and even visited each other during the time they were apart. This was until Stephen managed to convince her to leave Texas and move to New York with him. By then, Alyssa was 17 years old and quickly became pregnant. Finally, on January 29, 1998, Denise Rose Pladl was born. Denise's life did not start off well in a home where her father, Stephen, was abusive. According to her mother's testimony, she wanted to give her daughter a good life, but at that time she was not in a position to do so, and it was mostly because of Stephen. He really didn't seem to want to have children. In fact, by his actions, it seemed more like he completely despised the idea. To give you an example, he hated it when Denise cried. To make her stop, he would pinch her skin until it was almost black and purple. On one occasion, in fact, he put her inside a refrigerator and closed the door to muffle the sound. Yes, he put a baby inside a refrigerator. Sometimes he tried to make her stop crying by covering her mouth with his hand to the point of almost suffocating her. Stephen never held his daughter and didn't seem to have any affection for her either. It's not like Lisa had a good time with him either. She was also subjected to his abuse. During their time together, Stephen used to threaten Lisa and told her that if she ever tried to leave him, he would take his own life, and he would do whatever it took to make sure she saw it. Alyssa witnessed his aggression and violence on many occasions. She even once saw him kill a cat with his bare hands simply because he didn't like cats. He never had a job and instead stayed at home while Alyssa worked several jobs to support the family. Alyssa knew she could do better for her daughter by keeping her away from her abusive father. Unfortunately, she could never have imagined what was going to happen. That is why she finally decided to give little Denise up for adoption when she was just 7 months old. Although the reason she gave Stephen for the adoption was that she suffered from depression and therefore could not take care of her daughter. It was then that Denise was adopted by Anthony and Kelly Fusco, a couple who had been married since 1983 and already had 2 biological daughters. Her name at that time then changed to Katie Rose Fusco Pladl. From now on, we will call her Katie. Katie began living with her new family in the town of Dover. This family lived in a trailer park or a neighborhood of mobile homes in the town of Dover, New York. Anthony was part of the Coast Guard and also worked as an officer in federal corrections. Katie was then raised without distinction and led a calm, uneventful life. From a very young age, she developed a great passion for drawing and art. She started drawing when she was 5 years old. At first, she would imitate drawings from magazines or paintings her mother had. Later, as she grew older, she began to draw her own creations. When she reached adolescence, she started attending Dover High School, where she graduated without any major issues. Katie was a shy and quiet girl, so she didn't stand out much at school, but she was known for her drawings. She used to take advantage of every free moment to draw anything. What she liked most was creating little comic strips. After finishing high school, Katie wanted to pursue a career as an artist. She also planned to study digital advertising at university. However, there was something she had to do first. Katie knew she was adopted, and she was truly curious to find out who her biological parents were. Although her adoptive parents weren't entirely convinced about what Katie wanted to do, they knew well that she was of legal age and could make her own decisions. Her adoptive parents had no problem then telling her who her biological parents were, and through social media, Katie was able to contact them. This was a decision that, of course, without her knowing it, would change the course of her life forever. Katie then decided to postpone her studies, not go to college that year, and go meet her parents, who at that time were living in Virginia. By August 2016, Katie was in Henrico County visiting her biological parents, who by that time also had 2 daughters, who were, of course, Katie's biological sisters. And yes, Alyssa stayed with Stephen. They decided to have and keep their next daughters, with the first of them being born in 2007, after they had already been together for several years. In many ways, they felt more prepared at that time. However, Stephen's attitude does not seem to have ever changed. The first days were very exciting. Everyone was happy to see each other again after so much time. But as the days went by, the relationship between Katie and her biological father began to cross the boundaries of a normal father-daughter relationship. It should be clarified that the marriage between Stephen and Alyssa was in its final stages. The relationship hadn't been good for years, in fact, it never was, but at that point, Alyssa really wanted to leave him, and they were on the verge of divorce. Even though they lived in the same house, for example, they slept in separate rooms. First of all, Alyssa took some time to properly explain to Katie what had happened and why she had to give her up for adoption. The truth is that it didn't really affect Katie much to find out that her father was abusive and that her biological mother had wanted to get her out of that situation. Instead of reacting badly to all this information, Katie did the opposite. Alyssa noticed something strange about how Katie and her father behaved. They used to spend a lot of time alone together, they would go out, just the two of them, and they seemed very close. Katie actually got along very well with her biological father, so much so that after a month of staying there, she even started sleeping on the floor of his room. Stephen Platt was 40 years old at that time, and when Katie, his daughter, arrived, he went through a pretty drastic makeover. He started letting his hair grow past his shoulders and changed his clothes to more youthful t-shirts and tight jeans. Let's just say he had changed his appearance to attract the attention of younger people. Alyssa then confronted Stephen, demanding an explanation about what was happening with his daughter, but he told her it was none of her business and kicked her out of the house. So Alyssa finally decided not to argue anymore and to leave together with her daughters. But Katie didn't want to do the same and decided to stay with her father despite all the warnings. Even though her mother sat down to explain to her what had happened when she was given up for adoption, why that had happened, and everything her father had done to her when she was just a baby, she didn't care. There have been previous attempts to explain why all this happened, why Katie stayed with him, saying that since she hadn't seen him all those years, she didn't understand that he was her father. She didn't see it that way, and that's why she had this mental freedom to stay with him. However, on Stephen's side, he saw her being born. He had seen her. When she was a baby, he knew he had a daughter all that time, and still, he didn't care when it came to sleeping with her. Once Alyssa left, and feeling calmer, she began to go through one of her daughter's diaries. They were still very young, they were 11 and 7 years old. I suppose she didn't think she would find anything terrible, but she was really surprised to find an entry that said Stephen had asked Alyssa and Stephen's daughters to start calling Katie mom instead of sister. But Alyssa didn't want to believe what she was seeing. Even in the same diary, her daughter had drawn a girl with a big belly. She imagined the worst and at the same time didn't want to believe it. She couldn't believe it. There wasn't much she could do either, since by then, Katie was of legal age and had decided on her own to live with her father. However, she was only able to confirm the pregnancy in September of that year, when her ex-husband called her to confess that he was going to start a new family with someone else. That someone else was Katie. With Alyssa out of the house, Stephen and Katie no longer had to hide. They were officially in a relationship and even planned to get married. That's how, in January 2017, Katie became pregnant by her own father. Finally, when Stephen and Alyssa's divorce was legally finalized 2 months later, in July 2017, Katie and her father got married. The strangest thing about all of this is that Katie's adoptive parents attended the wedding and seemed to be okay with it, although it really seems like we don't know the full story behind this. Maybe she lied to them a little, or maybe they simply agreed. Perhaps they didn't think he was her father, but rather someone else she had met while visiting him. We have the wedding photos, and you can see everyone looking fine, standing next to Katie. Katie can be seen wearing a black dress and boots, which from the front didn't reveal her condition. But in the photos taken from the side, you could see her 7-month pregnant belly at that time. So there were Stephen's parents, Katie's adoptive parents, all together, fully aware that she was pregnant by an older man, and someone had to know that they were father and daughter. Supposedly, Katie's adoptive parents knew what was happening, but since they couldn't do anything to stop her, they simply stayed with her, trying to support her. And I say supposedly because I didn't read this directly from them, but rather from news articles on the internet. In fact, Alice had previously called the police when she found out what was going on, but unfortunately, and for some reason at that time, no one did anything. There were no arrests the first time she contacted them, also in order to get married. They had moved to North Carolina and also lied when filling out the marriage paperwork, obviously omitting the detail that they were father and daughter. Then, in September, Bennett, the son of Katie and Stephen, was finally born. However, the happiness didn't last long because at the beginning of 2018, the police showed up at the door of Katie and Stephen Pladl's house to arrest them for incest. Finally, Alisa's pleas had been heard. Incest is a Class 5 felony with a maximum sentence of 10 years, if convicted. So they were taken away, but they didn't spend much time in jail since they posted bail. However, the judge forbade them from being together and took away custody of their son, granting it to Stephen's mother, in other words, Bennett's grandmother and great-grandmother. By this time, when they had been on the run and were finally caught, the case was already making headlines. People already knew about the Pladl incest story, but there was still one part left. During the following months, Kate tried to avoid contacting Stephen at all costs. On April 11, 2018, she called him to tell him that the relationship was over and that she didn't want to see him anymore. The next day, on April 12, 2018, 911 received a desperate call from Stephen's mother, who had herself received another call from him explaining what he had done, that he had left a key under the doormat and that she shouldn't go near his house. I'm going to play the call here so you can understand what's happening, but I'm telling you it's truly distressing.
He told me that, oh my God, that he killed his baby. He told you that he killed his baby? Okay, ma'am, listen to me. What is your name? He's not at home. His wife broke up with him. Over the phone yesterday, she's in New York, and he told me, he said he's on his way. He's going to bring the baby to her, and then he was coming back. He killed his wife. He killed her father, and I can't even believe this is happening. Where did he leave the baby? Okay, he said it was in the... What's your son's name?
So it's under this context that we move on to the day of the events. The events took place on April 12, 2018. Stephen, as I told you before, the day before had received a call from Katie in which she decided to end everything. So, he decided on his part to carry out a real massacre. He started by killing Bennett, the son he had with Katie. The investigators did not give many details about how he killed the baby. But after this, Stephen called his mother, which is the call I showed you earlier, and told her what he had done, and told her to call the police. After killing his son, Stephen drove 800 kilometers to New York, where Katie was living at that time. According to various testimonies, Stephen stalked the place where Katie's adoptive family lived. Then, when he finally saw Katie and her adoptive father leave the place, he followed them in his truck until they reached a traffic light near Route 7. There, Stephen got out of the car and gunned them both down with a rifle. A few hours later, the police found Stephen's truck with his body inside. And yes, he had taken his own life, thus putting an end to a series of 3 murders and a suicide. And beyond that, there isn't much more to say about the case since the perpetrator is dead. The baby and Katie are also dead, as well as her adoptive father. If you remember what I told you earlier, he had even told Alyssa that if she left him, he would take his own life and make sure she saw it. He carried out this promise, but with his new partner, with Katie, his daughter. And it's incredible too because Stephen hadn't been able to kill her when she was a baby. Katie had managed to escape a horrible future when her mother gave her up for adoption. And in the end, she died at the hands of the man she had managed to get away from. Not once, but twice. There is no trial, no prison, absolutely no consequence for this man, and I'll see you in another video. Goodbye.